Come on in. Welcome to Idled Out, where we talk all things Survivor. My name is Luke, and today we're talking about 10 individual jury votes that were really shocking. Those individual jury votes that make you go, you voted for them? To win money? I want to be clear. Today we're talking about individual votes for individual winners, not overall jury results that were controversial or confusing. I covered Survivor's most controversial final tribal results last year, so go check that out if that's what you're looking for. And look, I know that's a sore spot. Many of us lost friends and family members in the Michelle v. Aubrey wars. It's a truly horrible time for this nation, a real brother against brother conflict. And we were just rebuilding from the Natalie v. Russell wars. So rest easy. For now, I want to get even more granular and talk about Survivor's most shocking individual jury votes. From people who surprisingly put aside a grudge and bitterly voted for their sworn enemy, to players who seemingly just picked a name out of a hat, to votes so confusing some people don't think the jurors understood the vote they were even casting, some individual jury votes were really surprising. So let's count them down. All that said, let's dig into 5 of Survivor's most surprising individual jury votes ever. At number 5 is Dan's vote for Mike in Survivor Worlds Apart. Look, if anyone was going to be bitter in the history of Survivor, it would be Dan Foley. In the early days of Worlds Apart, Mike and Dan were friends and allies who worked together, despite Dan's personality. But that all changed at the auction, when Mike tried to back out of a gentleman's agreement between him, Dan, and Carolyn to all buy their letters from home for only $20, so that each of them would have an even shot of getting an advantage at the end. At the last second, Mike tried to weasel his way out of buying his letter, caught major flack for it, and ultimately bowed to the social pressure and went ahead and bought his letter. But this made him a social outcast amongst his alliance, and he had to immunity and idle his way to the end of the game from this point on. You know, over a thing that didn't even happen. I shan't have to tell you that Dan bitterly held this against Mike the rest of the game. Their relationship was fractured. All Dan wanted was to see Mike fail, but Mike just kept winning challenges. Dan took this all very personally and blamed Mike for everything bad that ever happened to him from this point on. Why can't I spell? Fucking Mike! At the final 6, Mike again won immunity, and the majority alliance was, for the first time ever, forced to turn on itself. Tyler doesn't count. The target landed on Carolyn, but she played an idol, and her and Mike's votes sent Dan out of the game. Dan's face from the jury every time Mike rolled into tribal council with the immunity necklace on is truly priceless. He wanted nothing more than to see Mike at Ponderosa so he could rip him a new one. But unfortunately for Dan, he had to wait all the way until Final Tribal to drag Mike. At Final Tribal, Dan climbs on his soapbox and gives a speech chastising Mike for the auction faux pas and for immunitying his way to the end. You can't just challenge win your way to the end, he argues. You have to use your social and strategic acumen, like me. After the speech, Mike actually asks for permission to apologize to Dan and, get back on that soapbox. Now, Dan knows a thing or two about sincere apologies. He apologized to Sierra no less than 3 times for blindsiding her on the Lindsay vote. He's that good at apologies. How do you do it, Dan?
When you listen like a girl, you empathize. You just smile and nod. Yes, dear, I understand. You're right.
I'm shocked Mike's apology worked. He really did earn Dan's vote at the last second with a sincere sounding apology, and Dan put aside his extreme bitterness to vote for his former blue-collar BFF. How did Mike win over the world's most bitter juror with an apology? He just listened and empathized with Dan. Yes, Dan, I apologize. You're right. At number 4 are basically all of the votes in Survivor China. Looking at who voted where at this final tribal council, it seems borderline random. Eric voted for Amanda, James voted Courtney, Frosty voted Todd. None of this makes any sense. The apparent randomness of most of the jury votes here may be because heading into Final Tribal, this jury was genuinely up in the air. My understanding is that the jury was leaning slightly towards Courtney before Tribal Council, but almost everyone's vote was up for grabs. This is one of those rare Final Threes where everyone played a good and respectable game, and the votes will come down to how they articulate their game to the jury. Unfortunately for Courtney and Amanda, Todd delivered an all-time great Final Tribal Council and easily sealed his win here. Courtney was fine, but playing defense and giving Todd too much strategic credit, and Amanda was Amanda. Do you even want to be here? Still, the jury votes coming down the way they did is surprising, not because Todd won, but because of who voted where. Frosty's vote for me has always been one of the weirdest ever. Frosty and Courtney had a little flirtmance going on. They're even flirting at Final Tribal Council. And Todd organized his blind side. If Courtney was going to get anyone's vote, I would have been certain it was Frosty's. James voting for Courtney is another surprise for me. James is not a bitter juror, but considering everyone, including the finalists, agree that Todd played the more overtly strategic game, you'd think he'd sent his vote Todd's way. I mean, I guess there's that scene early on where Jean Robert charmingly implies James has a crush on Courtney, but we all know James would never betray his true Bei Long Bu. Eric's Amanda vote is another bizarre one for me. Did he genuinely want her to win? Was it a sympathy vote? Maybe he just wanted her to get the million so she could buy some non-blurry clothes. The unpredictability is part of what makes China's Final Tribal one of the best, though. It's one of the only times in history where it really felt like all three finalists could take home a well-earned victory, which kinda makes Gabon the Bizarro World version of this season. In that season, all the jury votes were locked in before Tribal, and none of the finalists deserved to win. At number 3 is Abby's vote for Denise in Survivor Philippines. Like Dan, this is another one where I'm just super surprised the juror in question was able to set aside their personal grievances and vote for the best player to win. Survivor Philippines is a season of contentious strategic rivalries. Henner and Jeff Kent, Scoopin and Artis, Zane and Zane, but few are as memorable as the relationship between Denise and Abby Maria. There was no love lost between Denise and Abby. From basically the second they met at the merge, they did not enjoy each other's company, and Denise more than once reduced Abby to tears. Abby is brash and direct, with a vaguely threatening aura. As a therapist, Denise is also very direct, and was definitely not afraid to point out Abby's personality flaws in front of the jury. They both make salient points. Abby is of course difficult to live with, and Denise is belittling her strategically. Both are correct, which is what makes this rivalry so fun. Denise was just joining the chorus on all the Abby hate though. I think almost everyone who's ever played Survivor with Abby will tell you two things. One, something about the game of Survivor just makes Abby a very unpleasant person to be around 150 to 200% of the time. And two, Abby is the nicest and most enjoyable person ever to be around outside of the game. She's just not great at making friends in Survivor. In both her games, Denise's biggest rivalry was probably Abby. In both Abby's games, Denise was probably up there after RC, Woo, PG, Scoopin's head. On her way out the door, Abby tries her best to warn Scoopin and Lisa that Denise is going to win this game, and they're making a huge mistake voting her out. I mean, voting out Abby isn't the biggest mistake Mike Scoopin would make this decade, but it's still not great. At Final Tribal, I was fully expecting the classic Abby pettiness, but Abby Maria is always full of surprises. As we learned in Cambodia with her note-taking, she actually takes her role as a juror very seriously. Denise is the obviously only choice in this final three if you're voting on any sort of strategic criteria. And Abby, of all people, does the unthinkable and puts her feelings aside and votes for the best player, as did almost everyone. Although I'm convinced that poor Carter was confused and thought he was serving on an actual jury and sentencing one of them to life in prison. Good kid. At number 2 is Nayanka voting for Fabio instead of Chase in Survivor Nicaragua. Now we are getting into the realm of fans actually thought this person didn't know they were voting for a winner territory. As we saw it, Nayanka and Fabio were sworn enemies throughout Nicaragua. From day one, they were never on the same page, and she was constantly attacking him for increasingly petty reasons. And the first reason she ever attacked him is because he looked in her direction, so things were starting off pretty petty already. In fact, the only thing Nayanka liked about Fabio were his socks, which are, by all accounts, quite cozy. Now, if we really wanted to give Nayanka strategic credit, we could say she was the only one in Nicaragua who saw through Fabio's pretty boy airhead act, and her antagonizing him was just an outward manifestation of the growing strategic threat he posed looming in her mind. And, okay, yeah, I can't continue that train of thought. It's Nayanka. Nayanka just did not like him. And, to be fair, vice versa. I don't think he really appreciated her stealing food, wearing his socks without his permission, attacking disabled women, quitting, taking a spot on a reward when she knew she was quitting later. I can't list all the things she did. We'd be here all day. And speaking of weed, that is apparently what Fabio and Nayanka had in common. Nay famously got one of the most inaccurate edits in Survivor history. They punitively showed all of her most hot-headed moments as punishment for her late game quit. Yeah, believe it or not, her being this hilarious was intended as a punishment.
Because if it happens again, and I'm gonna pull you again. And hopefully I'll push you so hard that damn leg will fly off.
In reality, Nayanka was pretty well liked amongst the Nicaragua cast, and probably had genuine winner equity if she made it to the end of the game with Purple Kelly and Sash, which would have been an even funnier winner result than the one we got. And speaking of misleading edits, while Fabio and Nayanka did have disagreements earlier in the game, they did bond and ultimately become pretty friendly, partially over their mutual love of the Devil's Lettuce, which we did not see for obvious reasons. I mean, look at her vote for him. I can promise you right now she's not referencing John 4:20 in the Bible, but this information all came to light in interviews much later after the fact. Seeing Nayanka, of all people, cast the winning vote for Fabio over a game-long ally that she literally gave her idol to when she quit the game was wild at the time. I remember seeing that vote and being like, there's no way Nayanka voted for Fabio. What are you, high? At number 1 is Christie's vote for Jenna to win in Survivor Amazon. This is undoubtedly the most shocking and surprising jury vote of all time. A major part of Christie's Survivor story is her hatred of Jenna and Heidi. She truly resented them because she felt they treated her poorly and that they thought they were better than her. From moment one, Christie views them as cliquey mean girls who treat her differently because she's deaf, and nothing changed 30+ days into the game. And I would like to set the record straight here. Christie, that's completely wrong. They treat you differently because they're younger and cuter and with better bodies. It's totally different.
We're younger and we're cuter. We've got better bodies.
Throughout the game, Christie felt that Jenna and Heidi were dismissive and mean to her, and they're generally on opposite sides of most every major vote due to this rift. When Christie is blindsided at Final 7 before Jenna or Heidi leave the game, her literal final words in the game are vowing not to let either of them win the $1 million.
I'm gonna make sure those freaking evil stepsisters of mine are not gonna win the $1 million.
Ouch. So after all that, imagine everyone's surprise when Christie casts her vote for Jenna to win over Matthew. There's no jury vote more shocking than this. This result was so shocking, in fact, that for nearly 2 decades, people have speculated that Christie mistakenly thought she was casting votes against the finalists instead of for. Now, the notion that Christie mistakenly thought she was voting against Jenna has always felt super ableist to me. There's literally no evidence that Christie thought this other than her in-game dislike of Jenna. Like Dan or Abby, Christie just swallowed her pride and voted for the person she thought played the better game, regardless of personal feelings. I mean, what was she gonna do? Vote for Matt? While Christie's vote being intentional might be a disappointment for some Survivor conspiracy theorists out there, I genuinely think it's more shocking that Christie chose to vote for Jenna rather than us having a juror who misunderstood the rules and voted incorrectly. I mean, she really hated Jenna and Heidi. And while we're debunking Survivor conspiracy theories, Eric, Alexis, and James weren't secretly disqualified in Survivor Micronesia, Fiji was not going to be another race-divided season, and Jimmy T is, actually, Malcolm from the future. Got nothing else for ya. Don't be an evil stepsister. Like and subscribe and I'll get you more Survivor content just like this. Until next time, don't get idled out.